So, Shillyboy, in our workshops, on our courses, on our webinars, a very common question when it comes to trust are the tax rates. And talk about you get taxed at 45%, so that's expensive. Maybe give us your opinion on what are the tax benefits of a trust, and we'll start there.
Look, I hear that a lot where people are saying trust is actually expensive. It gets taxed at 45%. Yes, if you don't do a proper tax planning, you will be taxed at 45%, which is a default tax rate for the trust. However, if you do a proper tax planning, you can actually get beautiful and actually efficient tax benefit that comes with a trust. A classical one, which is a common law principle, is what we call conduit pie principle, which allows you to actually move the income through a trust to the beneficiaries of that particular trust, where you find that actually those beneficiaries can actually be taxed more efficiently at the lower rate as compared to the trust. So in most cases, we always say that a trust should always, if you are planning your things efficiently, should always be the last taxpayer to be taxed, which means that you can actually look at various ways to move money around so that the trust at the end of the day is the one to be taxed last, which contract pie principle actually allows you to do that.
Absolutely. And Shillyboy, another question is when investors are buying and selling, they're flipping properties,
Yes.
is it still beneficial to flip through a trust or should they do it through a company?
You can. It depends on the circumstances. Let me give you a scenario. If, let's say, for instance, the beneficiaries of that chart of the trust are minors, which in this particular who are minors who are not actually generating any form of income. So you can already know that they will be sitting at probably zero tax rate, right?
Yeah.
So if you flip a property through the trust, can you see that using the conduit pie principle that I just alluded to, you can actually distribute that particular income to the beneficiaries who are minors, who actually can even enjoy tax-free threshold of about 99,000 as it is currently. So which means that if, let's say, for instance, the flipping profit is about 300,000 and you've got beneficiaries who are about maybe four of them, you can actually split that 300,000 to them, and then you can see that what they're going to get, each of them, is actually below tax-free threshold. Can you see that is the beneficiaries that are actually even
Yes.
potentially more likely are not going to be taxed as compared to if you just retain that money actually into the trust will be the one that is taxed at 45%. So it's a matter of saying, getting involved with a tax planner to say, how do I move this money around? Which means that you can still flip the property through the trust. You just need to actually do more tax planning
Yes.
after you've done that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So Shillyboy, why is it important that we go for two trusts and not one trust?
Look, in most cases, and let's unpack this actually. You will typically, where you're dealing with property investors, you'll find commonly where they use what you call property trust. And then you'll find those who actually also, on top of that, they've got what you call family trust, right?
Okay.
So now, the true differentiating factor here is the nature of the investment they actually ring-fence within these two structures.
Yeah.
So you'll typically find in a family trust where people actually put more cash reserves there in a case of rainy days where they can actually even bail out that particular property trust. You know,
Yeah.
in business, things can go south.
Yes.
So now this is typical what you'll find. Some people you find actually they put in those Ferraris, those you see that in the likes of scientists, they actually tend to buy those fancy assets actually within the family trust. And then you find some of them actually even put things like holiday homes. You can actually ring-fence them for asset protection point of view. You can actually ring-fence them. So that's what you'll typically find. Others, they'll actually even make the family trust a beneficiary of their life policies and their retirement benefits, all those various type of financial product that you will typically find within the family structures. Now, property trust will be sort of a special purpose vehicle, which in this case is a trust, where it's used or utilized to actually own the shares of various property companies that you will actually be having or forming as you go along and on your property journey, right?
Yes.
So you'll typically find that property trust is for that. It's ring-fencing those ventures. And you will typically also try to actually separate the two because in most cases, these trading trusts as property trust it will be exposed. It will be known by your partners. You can see
Yeah.
that from their constitutional right, that confidential right that you as a taxpayer or as an individual, you are actually bestowed to under the constitution, it's actually slowly disappearing because it gets to be exposed. Many lawyers, when you're transferring properties, they figure you until to the end. So your trust will end up actually not being a bit of confidential thing. So you want to actually shift the money now and then to a more confidential structure that you and your family only knows to in order to preserve this wealth. So this is what typically you find why people actually choose also to actually separate their affairs just for confidential, also just to ring-fence certain assets that they think that the family should actually be protecting. Also, what we actually always also encourage is the importance that these family trusts should never actually also stand for surety. So,
Yeah.
which means that is the cornerstone, is really a sacred place for the family
And there's no
well-being.
debt, eh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They should not put debts there because you want to make sure that should anything goes wrong, in other ventures like
Sure.
property trust, but the wealth of the family is actually secured, which means when you secure the family wealth, you actually secure the well-being of the generations to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shillyboy.
Thank you so much.
So, Shillyboy, let's say I go out and I set up a trust. Talk to us about the importance of why do I need an independent trustee?
Okay, so if you recall a couple of years back, most people actually set up what you call family business trust, which
Yeah.
is any normal sort of a trust that is actually going to be investing with third parties, right? So before that, the independent trust was not actually requirements, but there was a directive around 2014, which the Master of High Court actually issued to say all the family business trust actually needs to have an independent trust. And this was coming from sort of a historical cases where they found that actually families upon the death of the founders of these trusts tend to fight for this wealth of these
Yeah.
families, and also the trust tend to not to be administered efficiently and according to the legal frameworks like Trust Property Control Act of this world, right? So in order to minimize that, the Master of High Court actually issued that directive to say all the family business trust needs to have an independent trustee. And this is where the likes of us who actually professionally offer that kind of a service of independent trustee. So our role actually as independent trustees is to ensure that the compliance and also of the compliance is actually adhered to by these trustees and the beneficiaries, and the trust is actually also compliant with the relevant regulatory frameworks like Trust Property Control Acts.
Absolutely. And obviously, Shillyboy, there's a fee that you've got to pay for this independent trustee. What's all included in that fee?
Look, like I said, the role you're actually paying for the services, the professional service of these particular independent trustees. So they will be assisting with actually drafting the resolutions of any form of transactions that happens within the trust, and ensuring that also the trust complies with SARS regulations, tax returns are also submitted, ensuring that the assets and register as required by Trust Property Control Act is actually also prepared by so-called appointed accountant of that particular trust. So you will typically actually be paying those independent trustees to assist you in making sure that the administration of the trust is actually done according to the law.
100%. And then, Shillyboy, in the event that I go set up a trust at a company, but I haven't done anything, so it's dormant, do I still need to pay that independent trustee?
I think maybe let's even look at how the fees actually are regulated. The fees are governed by a trustee. So it's also crucial to have a discussion during that phase with your independent trustees to say, I'm at this phase, right? And then be guided by the trustee. What does the trustee say when it comes to the fees of independent trustee? In most cases, as much as you might classify your trust as being dormant, right? It's typically not really dormant efficient, because if you look at the legislations from a SARS point of view, any form of entity, trust, company, as considered to be professional taxpayer, they still need to submit tax returns even though they are not trading. So the trustees still have element of legal responsibilities actually to provide services. So you might not actually be generating an income through the trust, but the reality is that these independent trustees still needs to provide a service.
Yes.
So you might have to look into how to efficiently actually capitalize these trust to ensure that these independent trustees also are able to execute their responsibilities as independent trustees. So that's why also when we are doing structuring, when we are advising the property investors or the wealth creators, we always encourage them to say the timing also of creating these trusts are actually key, because you don't want to create a trust where you're going to have to wait for 2 years to actually before you even generate the income. That might not actually be plausible to actually consider that. So the timing is crucial, but also the discussion with your independent trustee is also crucial to say at what point do you charge so much fee, because the fees also will be warranted or dependent on the values of the trust, and the more the trust makes money, the more the fees will obviously increase based on the responsibilities.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, Shillyboy, let's say I go out there and I buy a few properties in my personal name, and now I've come to Intergen and I've discovered that maybe I bought in the wrong entity. So I want to now move these properties either into a company or a trust. What are the costs to do that and the tax implications?
And I like that question because it's a common
Common mistake, eh?
common mistake that property investors they do, but that's why we're here
Yeah.
to assist them to actually rectify such kind of mistakes. So you look at the moment you move something from one owner to the next, there's always tax implications.
Yeah.
That's number one. So the type of tax implications that we'll typically find there, it's what we call capital gain tax and the transfer duty. Those are typical tax implications. Of course, there will be other additional costs like paying the legal fees for transferring attorneys. There might also be bond cancellation fees in some cases, right? So there are various strategies that we typically employ to ensure that the taxpayer actually pays as less tax as possible.
Sure.
You know, so there are various strategies that we typically do, especially where the potential capital gain tax can actually be higher. In order to say that we can do that. But ultimately, also, it depends on the objective of that particular property investor to say, I want to transfer these to a company. I mean, I've got scenarios where someone says, I don't need a trust for whatever reasons. They're willing to expose their shares to the outside world. Should they be sued, owning the shares in the company directly? You can, if you get sued, you might end up actually losing the shares in that particular company. So that's why we always encourage the trust on top of the company. So in those cases, we can actually employ certain tax strategies where you're actually saving those particular capital gain. So people need to be mindful of capital gain tax, be mindful of transfer duty. It also depends on the nature of that particular property, because if it's a primary residence, there are tax benefits like 2 million capital gain exclusion that we can utilize in such a way that if the capital gain is actually less than 2 million, you're actually potentially not going to be paying tax in that particular transfer of a property, but you may find that yourself having to pay transfer duty. So, but it also issue of weighing the benefits, because if you are releasing the affordability and then by transferring the property, it might actually worth paying that transfer duty, because you're creating that affordability, you can buy more properties and creating more wealth.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Shillyboy, let's assume I've got a property in my personal name and I want to move that into a company. Can I do that? The tax implications?
You can actually do that. And I'll give you an example of some of the strategies even developers actually uses a lot. It's what we call Section 42. Though it's very, very, very technical, and this is where I'll prefer that we have a sit down and we actually go through the proper planning and understand so that you understand the implications of using that particular section. There's what we call Section 42, so which it can actually assist you with actually not paying capital gain tax and potentially also transfer duty. So I always actually encourage the property investors, especially those who have bought a couple of properties in their personal names. You find that you've got a huge capital gain tax that potentially you're going to pay by transferring this particular property. So what you need to do is to come and sit down with and say, okay, how do I then move these properties? Then I'll tell you that this is your base cost, this is your proceeds, which is market value at that particular point in time of transferring that. These are your potential capital. I mean, if you're sitting the capital gain tax of about 10 million or 5 million, or it can be actually a quite amount that you need to pay over to SARS. So you might actually consider to say, how do I actually move these particular properties without actually even paying? This is where we employ Section 42. It's quite technical, I must say.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why we need to sit down and actually do the proper calculation to say, what would be the implication? What is the downside of Section 42? Because sometimes people don't actually pay attention to that, and it can be very, very expensive. So you need a specialist like Intergen and who actually specialize in that model to say, how best do I do that? Because it also needs to have certain documentation that you need to provide to SARS to actually employ that Section 42. So you're more than welcome actually to have a chat with us, which we do it on a daily basis. And we actually enjoy that. We found to have saved a lot of money for property investors using that particular model. So, and yeah, we even actually understand the submissions and the reporting to SARS, which is also crucial, because if you know that if you don't actually submit the right information, the right supporting documents, you can actually be subjected to penalties as a result of not complying actually efficiently with SARS.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Shillyboy, if I go set up a company, I'm the director of that company, do you advise that I pay myself a salary from that company? Is it advisable or not?
It's actually one of those interesting questions, because entrepreneurs will come and tell you, or property investors will come and tell you, say, listen, what is the most efficient way to return money to myself? Because at the end of the day, you go into business to actually return money to. So salary is one of those that typically property investors will use to return money back to themselves for well-being, of course, right? But it's also crucial to say you need to compare, right? Maybe let me give you example of how do we typically return money back to the shareholders. It could be salary, it could be dividends, it could be return of what you call contributed tax capital. Yeah, whatever you put into the company, you return it back.
Yeah.
So in this case, to whether it's actually better to use salary, it also depends on what in your personal capacity are you already any form of income, because it might not actually be smart to actually, where you're already sitting at the marginal tax rate of 40% or 45%, to actually be getting salary, because you will be taxed at 45%. So you might actually consider paying dividends, where you're actually being taxed at effectively maybe like 20%. Of course, you'll pay tax at 27% or 28% at the company level. But if you look at the effective tax rate, it's actually lower than if you were to pay directly the salary. So it also, each person's circumstances, it's actually crucial to actually do the numbers to say, where are you sitting at in terms of in your personal capacity, and then compare that. Because if you're not earning any form of income, it actually can be advisable to actually earn the salary at that particular point in time. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.